Number one, Mr. Speaker.
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, this morning I had meetings with... Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This morning I had meetings with ministerial colleagues and others. Thank you. Thank you very much. Immediately following PMQs, I will attend the Welcome Home march-in to thank all those involved in pitting our evacuation from Kabul. In addition to my duties in this House, I shall have further such meetings later today.
Chris Bryant.
I too will be attending I too will be attending in a few minutes. Nicky's 7-year-old son had 37 seizures a day because of a brain disease he suffered from. He's had surgery now, but it's a struggle every day to get him to stay in school. Nicky, is supporting the acquired brain injury bill because she believes that the government needs to have a cross-departmental strategy for supporting those who've had an acquired brain injury, whether that's rugby players with concussion and dementia, it's women who've been beaten in the head by their partners, it's people who've had brain injuries due to children who've had suffered from carbon monoxide poisoning, soldiers who've been in explosions. I really hope that the government is going to back the acquired brain injury bill. But above all, we need a strategy to help the 1.4 million people in this country. Will he give us that?
Prime Minister.
I want to thank the right honourable member for raising this vital issue and for his commitment to this cause, his personal commitment. And I can assure him that we are studying his proposed bill and working to ensure that people do get the support for the acquired brain injuries that they have received. And what we can certainly pledge at this stage to do, and I hope this will be of some use to him and the many who care about this issue in the way that he does, and as I'm sure members do across the House, the Department of Health and Social Care will lead on the development of a cross-departmental government strategy on acquired brain injury and other neurological conditions. I'll be very happy to share details with him shortly.
Felicity Bucket.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In July of this year, my constituency, Kensington, suffered devastating flooding, with more than 2,000 homes flooded, a river running down Portobello Road, and a lot of residents having to move into temporary accommodation. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that Thames Water needs to come up with short and long-term solutions, and they need to make sufficient investment in infrastructure to prevent events like this happening again?
Yes.
Prime Minister.
My honourable friend is absolutely right to raise flooding, Mr. Speaker, and she's right about short and long-term solutions, and that's why I'm proud, amongst other things, to have helped instigate the Thames Tideway Tunnel, with the biggest super sewer in the history of this country, which will help to deal with what happens in London when the Basingstoke interceptors overflow and to deal with flooding throughout the city.
Leader of the Opposition, Keir Starmer.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. At the last election, the Prime Minister promised that nobody would have to sell their home to pay for care. That's another broken promise, isn't it?
Prime Minister.
No, Mr. Speaker. No, Mr. Speaker. Because if he looked at what we are proposing, and if he supported what we are proposing, which is fixing something that Labour never fixed in all their years in office, Mr. Speaker, we are saying to the people of this country that we will disregard your home as part of your assets if you and your spouse are living in it. And number two, Mr. Speaker, you can have a deferred payments agreement if you move out of it and you're living in residential care. You can have a deferred payments agreement. But most important of all, Mr. Speaker, by putting the huge investment that we are making now in health and social care, we are allowing for the first time the people of this country to insure themselves against the potentially catastrophic, the otherwise catastrophic costs of dementia or Alzheimer's, Mr. Speaker. And even if you're not one of those people who suffer from those afflictions, we are taking away the anxiety from millions of people up and down the land about their homes.
Keir Starmer.
I think the Prime Minister just described the broken system he said he was fixing. So it's certainly not a straight answer. Let's have another go. let's have another go. I see they turned up this week, Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, he used to say that...
Sorry. I don't think I need any further. Yesterday we had a very good example of the house being at its best in that church, in that cathedral. Please, let's show some respect. I want to be able to hear not only the Prime Minister but the Leader of the Opposition. Shouting each other down doesn't do you or your constituents any good. We need to hear the questions, and I certainly need to hear the answers. And if anybody doesn't like it, please leave now. Keir Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, it's not a complicated question, so let's have another go. He used to say that nobody would have to sell their home to pay for their care. It's in his manifesto right here. On the basis of that promise, he then put up tax on every working person in the country. So has he done what he promised and ensured that nobody will have to sell their home to pay for care? Yes or no? It's not complicated.
Prime Minister.
No, it's not complicated, Mr. Speaker, because what we're doing is disregarding your home as part of the assets that we calculate. So if you go down to £100,000, that's the beginning where we will ask you to contribute. But your home is not included in that, Mr. Speaker. And they have absolutely no plan. They've spent decades failing to address this. And only a few weeks ago, Mr. Speaker, they failed to vote for the £36 billion that will enable us to fix this and to help people up and down the country, not just to fix the social care problem, but to pay for people to live in their own homes, Mr. Speaker, and receive the care they need in their homes. That's what this One Nation Conservative government is doing. Why won't it support it?
Mr. Speaker, he's had two opportunities to stand by his manifesto commitment and he's not taken them. Well, it says he just has. So let's test this in the real world, Prime Minister. Under the Prime Minister's plans, a person with assets worth about £100,000, most of it tied up in their home, would have to pay £80,000. They'd lose almost everything. How on earth does the Prime Minister think that they can get their hands on that kind of money without selling their home?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm going to have a third go at trying to clear this up in the befuddled mind of the right honourable gentleman opposite, because it is important, and the fact is that the party opposite have totally failed to address it. They haven't had the guts to fix this in all their time in office. It's something left over. It's something left over from the Attlee government, and we are fixing it. And let me repeat for the third time, Mr. Speaker, since your home is disregarded. Number two, even if you have a second home in your residential care, Mr. Speaker, you have a deferred payments agreement if you want. And number three, Mr. Speaker, we are allowing you to insure yourself for the first time against the catastrophic cost by capping it at 86,000, Mr. Speaker. And now he stood on a manifesto to put the cap where, Mr. Speaker? At £100,000, Mr. Speaker.
Keir Starmer.
The question was very simple, and it's the question all of his backbenchers on it. If you've got a house worth about £120,000, £140,000, how do you find £80,000+ without selling your home? It's common sense. Strip away the bluster, strip away the deflection, strip away the refusal to answer the question. There's a simple truth, and this is why the Prime Minister won't address it. People will still be forced to sell their homes to pay for care. That accounts... Why did they... Look at the vote the other day to see the answer to that question. They'll still be forced to sell their home. It's another broken promise. Just like he promised that he wouldn't put up tax. Just like he promised 40 new hospitals. Just like he promised a rail revolution in the north. Mr. Speaker, who knows if he'll make it to the next election? But if he does, how does he expect anyone to take him and his promises seriously?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, yet again he raises the rail revolution in the north. And the three new high-speed lines, Mr. Speaker, 96 billion pounds. Nothing like it. Again, nothing like it, Mr. Speaker. Nothing like it for a century. And just for the advantage of what I didn't even know this. I was in a state of complete innocence about this last week, Mr. Speaker. But it turns out that the right honourable gentleman actually campaigned against HS2 altogether. Said it would be devastating and said it should be cancelled. I can tell you something, Mr. Speaker. HS2 runs through my constituency as well. And I took a decision, even though it's been very tough for my constituents, I took a decision that it was the right thing to do for the long-term interests of the whole country. How can they possibly trust that man?
Mr. Speaker, I think he's lost his place in his notes again. The only thing he's delivering is high taxes, high prices and low growth. I'm not sure the Prime Minister should be shouting about that. And it isn't just broken promises, it's also about fairness. Everyone needs protection against massive health and care costs. But under his plans, someone with assets worth about £100,000 will lose almost everything. Yet somebody with assets of about £1 million will keep almost everything. It's just like their 2017 manifesto all over again. Only this time, something has changed. He's picked the pockets of working people to protect the estates of the wealthiest. How could he possibly have managed to devise a working-class dementia tax?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think I've answered that question 3 times already. This does more for working people up and down the country than Labour ever did. Because we're actually solving the problem that they failed to address. We're disregarding your housing asset altogether, Mr. Speaker, while you're in it. And he talks about jobs, he talks about working people. Well, let me just remind him. There's just one key statistic that people should bear in mind. It's now almost a month after furlough ended. He talks about the economy, Mr. Speaker. There are now more people in work than there were before the pandemic began. And that's because of the policies this government has pursued.
Here's Starmer.
Mr. Speaker, there's no getting away from it. Working people are being asked to pay twice. During their working lives, they'll pay much more tax in national insurance, whilst those living off wealth are protected. And then when they retire, Mr. Speaker, they face having to sell their home when the wealthiest won't have to do so. It's a classic con game, a Covent Garden pickpocketing operation. The Prime Minister's the front man, distracting people with wild promises and panto speeches, whilst his Chancellor dips his hand in their pocket. But now the Prime Minister's routine is falling flat. His Chancellor is worried that people are getting wise. His backbenchers say it's embarrassing. Your words. Your words. And senior people in Downing Street tell the BBC it's just not working. Is everything OK, Prime Minister?
Prime Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I tell you what's not working. It's that line of attack. Because I just want to repeat. I want to repeat the crucial point, Mr. Speaker. We're delivering for the working people of this country. We're delivering for the people of this country, and we're fixing the problems that they thought could never be fixed. We're doing the things that they thought were impossible. And let me repeat: there are now more people in work in this country, jobs up, with their wages going up, Mr. Speaker, than there were before the pandemic began. And that is because of the policies that this government has followed. Whether it's on rolling out the vaccine, if you remember, that he opposed, whether it's on investment that he opposed. He did, Mr. He didn't want to invest in the vaccine task force. I seem to remember. Or whether it is making the strategic investments that we have. if we listened to Captain Hindsight, Mr. Speaker, we would have no HS2 at all, because that was what he stood for. And if we listened to him, we would all still be in lockdown, Mr. Speaker.
Can the Prime Minister confirm that he will use the rest of the UK's presidency of COP to urge countries around the world to make good on the pledges that they made in Glasgow? And does he agree with me that decarbonisation can create millions of jobs across the UK and around the world?
Prime Minister.
I totally agree with my right honourable friend who's right about this and many other things, and that's why our transition to green jobs is supporting 440,000 new green high-wage, high-skilled jobs across the UK, and the breakthrough agenda that we had endorsed at COP26, I believe will support between 20 and 30 million jobs across the world by 2030, and I think that's probably a gross underestimate.
We now come to the Leader of the SNP, Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm sure you will wish to join me and indeed the rest of the House in welcoming the moderator of the Church of Scotland to the gallery today, Lord Wallace, and to thank him for his sage words at his sermon this morning. Mr. Speaker, the past few weeks have shown this Tory government at its very worst. A Tory sleaze and corruption scandal on a scale not seen since the 1990s. Tory cuts and tax rises that will leave millions of people worse off. A litany of broken promises, from HS2 to carbon capture, social care, the triple lock on pensions. And who can possibly forget the £20 billion bridge to Ireland that evaporated into thin air? At the centre of all this is one man, a Prime Minister who is floundering in failure. So, can I ask the Prime Minister, with his party falling in the polls, his colleagues breathing against him, has he considered calling it a day before he's pushed out the door?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I think what the people of this country want to hear is less talk about politics and politics, and they want to talk about what the government is doing for the people of Scotland. And what the Scottish Government is doing for the people of Scotland, which isn't enough, Mr. Speaker. But what we will do, he talks about infrastructure investment, and I can tell him that if he will wait till I think till Friday or later this week, he's going to hear about what we're going to do with the Union Connectivity Review to ensure that the people of Scotland are served with the connections that they need, and which the Scottish Nationalist Party has totally failed to put in.
Ian Blackford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. That certainly wasn't an answer to the question I asked, but we're used to that. And I didn't expect the Prime Minister to take responsibility because he never does. But this isn't just about the chaos in the Conservative Party. It's about the state of the United Kingdom under his failing leadership. Because whilst the Prime Minister spends his time hunting for chatty pigs and staving off a leadership challenge from the Treasury, in the real world, Mr. Speaker, people are suffering a Tory cost of living crisis. Brexit is hitting the economy hard, but the Prime Minister can't even give a coherent speech to business. The Prime Minister's officials have lost confidence in him. Tory MPs have lost confidence in him. The letters are going in, and the public have lost confidence in him. Why is he clinging on when quite clearly he simply isn't up to the job?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I might ask the right honourable gentleman what on earth he thinks he is doing, talking about party political issues when what the people of Scotland want to hear is what on earth the Scottish National Government is doing. They're falling in the polls, Mr. Speaker. Their cause, yes they are, their cause is falling in the polls, and considering their manifold failures on tax, on education and all the things the people of Scotland really care about, I'm not surprised, and I can see some agreement on the benches opposite.
Jonathan Lord.
Mr. Speaker, I celebrate the recent successes of Woking College, my local sixth form college, and I welcome the recent government investment for a new teaching block, which will allow it to expand. Many colleges and students find BTECs to be a really valuable qualification and course, enabling progress into higher education and skilled employment. Does the Prime Minister agree with me that we should protect student choice and keep BTECs as an option for students?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we will continue. I thank my honourable friend. We will continue to fund some BTECs where there's a clear need for them. But I must stress to him that we've got to close the gap between the things that people study and the needs of business and employers, and that's what T-levels are designed to do.
Caroline Lucas.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I rarely agree with the Prime Minister, but last week, when he said that COP26 showed that we can end our reliance on fossil fuels, I did agree with him. But that begs the question as to why his government is pressing ahead, not just with the Cambo oil field, but with 39 other oil, gas and coal developments, which would amount to 3 times the UK's current annual climate emissions. Now, I don't want an answer about all the things he thinks he is doing on cars and cash and trees. I want him to tell the House if he will leave those fossil fuels in the ground, will he cancel those projects? And does he recognise that if he doesn't, he will need to ask for forgiveness, not just for losing his place in a speech, but for losing the future of our children?
Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we are not only powering past coal, going to an end to fossil fuel reliance in our energy generation at all by 2024, which is an absolutely stunning thing ahead of countries around the world. I'm glad that she's praising me for that. The Cambo oil field, as she knows, is for study by an independent regulator. But what we have also done, and led the world in this, Mr. Speaker, is stopped the financing of overseas hydrocarbons. And that is a fantastic thing which the whole world followed.
Dr.